To everyone at Mickey's Diner, she was just a lost little girl, desperately signing to a world that wouldn't answer. But to Emma, a waitress hiding from a violent past, she was the one person she couldn't ignore. She was the only one who spoke her language. That one small act of connection was a lifeline, but it was also a fatal mistake, because Emma didn't know that the man who just walked in was the obsessive, corrupt cop she'd spent 2 years running from. And she definitely didn't know the girl's father was Adrian Russo, the city's most feared mafia boss, who was about to tear the city apart to find her. She just wanted to help a lost child. But she never realized she had just stepped into the crossfire of a war, and given both sides the only weapon that mattered, her. What a setup, right? We are diving straight into the fire with this one. Welcome to our channel. We are so incredibly happy you're here. Before we go any further, we want to know who's in the room with us. Do us a huge favor and comment right now where you are watching from and what time it is for you. Are you like Emma, up at 2 a.m., or are you in the middle of your afternoon? Let us know down below. And if you're already hooked and you know this is going to be a wild ride, please hit that like button and smash subscribe. It's the best way to make sure you never miss a second of the drama. Alright, that's enough talking. Let's get back to the story. The neon sign for Mickey's Diner flickered, casting a sickly pink and blue buzz over the wet pavement. It was 1:47 a.m. This wasn't a time of day, it was a purgatory. Mickey's was a liminal space, a pause button for the lost and the lonely. It was a place for people with nowhere else to be, which made it the perfect place for Emma Chun. She moved through the haze of stale coffee and hot grease like a ghost. The graveyard shift had been a deliberate choice. In the harsh fluorescent daylight, people had faces, expectations, questions. But after midnight, customers were just silhouettes, hunched over their reflections in dark windows, nursing mugs like dying fires. They didn't want conversation, they wanted coffee. And Emma was an expert at pouring it. More, Han. Big Jim, a trucker on his regular cross-country haul, just grunted. Emma filled his mug without waiting for a verbal answer. Her movements were economical, silent. She refilled the salt shakers, wiped a counter that was already clean, and stacked cheap ceramic plates. She was a phantom in a beige uniform, and that was exactly how she wanted it. In booth 3, Tamala, a night shift nurse from County General, was staring into the middle distance, her scrubs rumpled, her face a mask of exhaustion. Emma slid a slice of apple pie in front of her. Tamala startled, then gave a weary nod. Emma just nodded back and disappeared again behind the steel pass-through. She had perfected the art of being invisible. It wasn't just a job skill, it was a survival tactic. Her hands, though quick and steady, ached. They felt too heavy, too full. They remembered a time when they weren't just for carrying plates and wiping counters. They remembered a time when they spoke. The memory hit her, sharp and bright, a splash of sunlight in the greasy diner. Sarah. Her younger sister, born into a world of silence. Emma, at 10 years old, had dived into that world with her. American Sign Language hadn't been a chore, it had been a key. It was their secret garden, their private language. While their parents tiptoed around Sarah with loud, slow words she couldn't hear, Emma's hands were flying. She remembered teaching Sarah the sign for a dragon, and the little girl's explosive, silent laughter as she signed a fire back, puffing out her cheeks. They told entire stories, built castles in the air, shared jokes that no one else in the room could understand. It was the purest, most unfiltered connection Emma had ever known. A piece of her soul lived in that language, a language she now kept locked away like a precious, painful relic. That bright, loving world was the first thing he'd noticed. Detective Mitch Rollins. He hadn't been a monster, not at first. He'd been a protector, or so she'd thought. He'd shown up after a minor fender bender, all solid competence and a disarming smile. He found her fascinating. When he saw her signing with Sarah in the park one day, his eyes had lit up. That's amazing, Em. You are special. He loved her special skill. A week later, he called. There's a witness, a deaf kid. No one can get a statement. Could you just help? For me? She had felt important. She had felt useful. She went to the precinct, her hands translating a terrified child's trauma into words Mitch could use. She had helped. They'd caught the guy. Mitch had called her his hero. But help quickly became assist. Assist morphed into expect. Her secret garden was paved over, turned into an asset for the 12th precinct. He'd parade her around. This is Emma. She's my secret weapon. Her language, born of love and sisterhood, became a tool for depositions, for interviewing victims, for staring into the face of the city's worst trauma and giving it a voice. She became his interpreter. His asset. The line between her life and his cases didn't just blur, he erased it. She tried to pull back. She was tired. The darkness she was translating was getting under her skin. She had a life. The memory that drove her here, to this diner, was sharp as a shard of glass. The night she said no. His charming smile didn't just fade, it evaporated, revealing something cold and hard beneath. He'd grabbed her wrist as she turned to leave his apartment. It wasn't a caress. It was a grip. Who else would understand you like I do, Em? His voice was low, menacing, a velvet glove over steel. You're not tired. You're just being difficult. I need you tomorrow. You don't understand, Mitch, I can't. You're mine. He'd said it so calmly. A simple statement of fact. And in that 1 second, she saw it. This wasn't love. It was ownership. Mitch believed that a love meant control, that her skills belonged to him. It's a toxic mindset that twists everything. If you believe respect and freedom are non-negotiable, hit that like button. Only people who think it's okay to control others will ignore it. That grip on her wrist was why she was here, pouring coffee at 1:47 a.m. His protection had become surveillance. His calls became check-ins. His check-ins became interrogations. He protected her right into a cage he'd built just for her. So she'd run. One duffel bag. $500 from an ATM. A bus ticket to a city where she knew no one. She traded her sunlit apartment for a shoebox room she paid for in cash. She traded her identity as a skilled interpreter for a beige apron and a name tag that just said Emma. Mickey's Diner wasn't a career. It was a foxhole. The bell above the diner door jingled, and Emma's entire body went rigid. Her breath caught in her throat. She forced her head to stay down, her hands gripping the edge of the steel sink, her knuckles white. It was just a college kid, soaked from the rain, shaking out his umbrella. Emma forced her shoulders down, forcing the air back into her lungs. She was safe. She was invisible. But she knew, with a cold certainty that lived in her bones, that the man she was hiding from was a detective. And detectives are very, very good at finding things. A sudden, violent gust of wind tore through the diner, slamming the front door against the bell with a crash that made Big Jim jump in his seat. The gust wasn't just wind, it was a slice of the raw, biting Chicago winter, and it brought something with it. Emma looked up from the sink, her heart still hammering from the false alarm. But this was real. Framed in the doorway, surrounded by a swirl of sleet and street steam, stood a child. She was small, maybe 8 years old, and so out of place she might as well have been an alien. She was drowning in a dark wool coat, the kind with a velvet collar and real horn buttons, a coat that probably cost more than Emma's last 3 paychecks combined. But beneath its expensive hem, her feet were bare except for a pair of pink, cartoon rabbit slippers, now soaked and dark with grime. Her little face was pale, streaked with clean lines where tears had cut through the city dirt. Her dark hair was plastered to her head. She stood frozen for a second, her eyes wide and black, darting around the diner like a cornered animal. Big Jim grunted, "Ain't that a little late for trick-or-treating?" and turned back to his mug. Tamala, the nurse, looked up with a flicker of professional concern, but it was quickly swallowed by her bone-deep exhaustion. The other two patrons didn't even bother to look. They just hunched further over their food. The girl, Lila Russo, stepped inside. The door hissed shut behind her, sealing her in with the stale air and the indifference. She looked at Big Jim, then at Tamala, her mouth opening and closing silently. A desperate, choked sound, no louder than a kitten's mew, escaped her. Then, her hands flew up. They were small, chapped hands, moving with a frantic, desperate energy. Emma didn't just see the motion, she felt it. It was a language she understood better than the mumbled orders and gruff comments of her current life. The girl's signs were choppy, panicked, blurred by her terror, but the meaning was screamingly clear. Lost. Help. Scared. Where? Help. Please. Emma's breath hitched. Her hand, holding a full coffee pot, froze in midair. It wasn't just a girl. It was Sarah. It was Sarah, age 6, lost in the department store, her little face crumpled in silent terror, her hand signing "Mommy?" Emma? While a crowd of well-meaning adults towered over her, their moving mouths offering no comfort. It was the crushing, suffocating loneliness of being silent in a world that could not, hear you. Emma had made a promise to her sister that day, a fierce, tearful vow whispered into Sarah's hair. "I will always hear you. I will never let you be alone like that. Ever." That promise, buried for 2 years under a mountain of fear and self-preservation, now exploded in her chest. It was a force more powerful than Mitch Rollins, more potent than her need to stay invisible. Her hard-won fear, the thing that kept her hidden in this greasy spoon at 2 a.m., was instantly and totally eclipsed by this older, deeper imperative. The glass coffee pot slipped from her numb fingers. It shattered on the checkerboard tile with a sound like a gunshot. Hot, black coffee and shards of glass sprayed across the floor. Every head in the diner snapped toward her. Big Jim swore. Tamala jolted upright. Emma's invisibility was gone, shattered as completely as the pot. She didn't care. She was already moving. She didn't walk, she practically ran, vaulting over the low counter pass-through, ignoring the crunch of glass under her sneakers. She skidded to a stop on her knees in front of the terrified girl, the impact jarring her bones. Lila flinched back, her hands freezing in midair, her eyes going wide with new terror. She was expecting to be yelled at, to be grabbed, to be ignored. Emma held up her own hands, palms open and steady, ignoring the sting of a small cut from a flying piece of glass. She kept her movements slow, deliberate, a beacon of calm in the girl's storm. "My name is Emma," she signed, her fingers moving with a fluency that felt like breathing after being underwater. "I understand you. You are safe." The transformation was instantaneous. It was the most profound, heartbreaking thing Emma had ever witnessed. The terror in Lila's eyes didn't just fade, it fractured, replaced by a wave of pure, uncomprehending shock. Her little mouth formed a perfect O. Her eyes scanned Emma's hands, then her face, then her hands again, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "You understand?" She signed back, her motion hesitant, almost a question. "Yes," Emma signed, a tear breaking free and tracing a hot path down her own cheek. "I understand everything." That was all it took. The dam of the child's composure broke. A raw, animal sob, silent but for the shuddering gasp of her breath, tore through her small body. She didn't just step forward, she launched herself into Emma's arms. Lila's small, cold hands grabbed the back of Emma's uniform, clinging with a desperate strength that belied her size. She buried her face in Emma's neck, her whole body shaking. She felt impossibly small, all sharp angles and a thundering, terrified heartbeat that Emma could feel against her own. Emma's arms wrapped around her, pulling her close. She held the girl with the same fierce, protective grip she had once held her sister. For a full minute, the diner ceased to exist. There was no coffee, no customers, no Mitch, no fear. There was only this child, this impossible, terrified, silent girl who had walked out of the storm and straight into the one part of Emma's soul she thought she had buried forever. Her carefully built walls, the ones that kept her invisible and safe, hadn't just cracked. They had been leveled, reduced to dust by the impact of a small, cold child in rabbit slippers. Emma Chun, the ghost of Mickey's diner, was holding a little girl in the middle of a shattered coffee pot, and she was well and truly seen. Emma was still on her knees, her arms locked around the small, trembling girl. The diner was tomb silent, save for the child's shuddering, silent sobs against her shoulder. Emma was vaguely aware of Big Jim staring, his coffee forgotten, and Tamala the nurse watching with a look of stunned comprehension. The shattered glass, the cold, the terror, it was a bubble, and Emma was at its center. She was just beginning to form the words, to sign, "It's okay, I'll call someone, who can I call," when the bell above the door jingled again. It wasn't a crash this time. It was a soft, deliberate jingle, followed by a heavy, measured footstep. Emma's blood didn't just turn to ice, it evaporated. Her entire body went rigid. She knew that footstep. She knew the creak of that specific leather utility belt, the faint, sharp scent of his cologne, sandalwood and stale cigarettes, that always preceded him. She had prayed, in her darkest moments of paranoia, that this would never happen. She had run 1,000 miles to prevent this. Her back was to the door, but she didn't need to turn. She felt his presence like a drop in barometric pressure. Dispatch, show me on scene, Mickey's diner. Possible 10-91V. His voice cut through the diner, all calm, practiced authority. Emma's heart, which had been hammering, seemed to stop. She squeezed her eyes shut. No. Please, God, no. She heard him walk toward the counter, his boots crunching on the glass she hadn't cleaned up. What the hell happened in here? He asked the room at large. Big Jim just grunted and pointed with his thumb. Lady dropped a pot. Then this kid. Mitch Rollins. He was on duty. He wasn't here for her. He couldn't be. He was just a cop, responding to, what? A call? No. He was cruising. This wasn't his precinct. Which meant he was hunting. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Emma remembered the thick files on his passenger seat, the late-night rants, the obsessive, frustrated energy he poured into the one case he couldn't crack. The name he spat like a curse. Russo. He'd been trying to build a RICO case against Adrian Russo for a year, staking out his properties, following his associates, looking for a single thread to pull. He'd shown her pictures once, surveillance photos. A black car. A grand, gated house. A man and a small, dark-haired child. This child. This wasn't a rescue. He wasn't a cop finding a lost girl. He was a predator who had just stumbled upon the bait of a lifetime. This was his golden ticket. His gaze swept past the booths, past the counter, and landed on the floor. On the spreading pool of coffee and the glittering shards of glass. On the waitress in the beige apron, kneeling in the middle of it. And on the small, expensively dressed child she was holding. Mitch's body went rigid. Emma could feel his stare on her back like a physical weight. A slow, wolfish grin she couldn't see, but knew was there, spread across his face. Bingo, he whispered to himself. Then, his eyes focused. He recognized the set of her shoulders. He recognized the fall of her dark hair. He stepped closer, his head tilting. The name was a breath, a stunned question. He couldn't believe it. Emma's shoulders tensed, a full-body flinch. She turned her head, slowly, her arms still locked around Lila. His face was a rapid, terrifying slideshow of emotions. First, stunned disbelief. He took an involuntary step back. Then, a flash of pure, unadulterated anger. And finally, settling over his features like a shroud, a chilling, possessive delight. It was the look of a man who'd lost his favorite possession and just found it, broken, in someone else's yard. Well, 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 he drawled, the sound a low, intimate rumble that made her skin crawl. Emma Chun. Hiding in plain sight. He unhooked his radio from his belt, letting it swing from his hand like a pendulum. Of all the diners, in all the towns, you had to walk into mine. He was savoring this, rolling the moment over on his tongue. He stepped closer, towering over her. Lila, sensing the new threat, burrowed deeper against Emma's chest. Mitch's eyes flicked from Emma to the girl clinging to her. So this is what you're doing now, Em? Hiding with the scum? Or just servicing them? She's a lost child, Emma whispered, her voice a dry rasp. She hadn't spoken to him in 2 years. Mitch laughed, a short, sharp bark. He straightened up, and the possessive ex-boyfriend was gone, replaced instantly by the cop. He tapped his badge, the metal gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I know exactly who she is, Emma. That's Lila Russo. And she's coming with me. He took another step, his shadow falling over them. I'm taking the girl into protective custody. Protective custody. The phrase was a mockery. It was the same word he used for her. I'm just protecting you, Em. He wasn't protecting this child, he was leveraging her. He would take Lila to a precinct-holding cell, call his captain, call the press, and use this terrified, 8-year-old girl as a battering ram against Adrian Russo. And he would take Emma as his bonus prize. Mitch is using his badge to bully and manipulate, twisting the law to serve his own obsession. It's a sick abuse of power. If you can't stand people who use their authority to intimidate others, comment "Justice for Lila" below. Silence is siding with the bully. Something inside Emma that had been frozen for 2 years, a core of strength she thought had died with her sister, cracked. The fear was still there, a cold, sickening ocean in her stomach, but a new, hot fury was rising through it. She stood up. It was a simple, fluid motion. She rose from her knees, bringing Lila with her, settling the child on her hip and shielding her with her own body. She was no longer a ghost in a beige apron. She was a wall. No. The word was quiet, barely louder than the hum of the coffee machine, but it cut through the diner like a razor. Mitch stopped, his smile fading. What did you say? I said, Emma repeated, her voice shaking but gaining a hard, unfamiliar edge, no. You're not taking her. Mitch's face darkened. The mask of the good cop evaporated. Don't be stupid, Emma. You're in my world now. You're standing in a room with a corrupt cop and a mafia princess. You are way, way out of your league. He pointed a thick finger at her. Now, give me the girl before I arrest you for obstruction of justice. And kidnapping. He lunged, his hand shooting out not for Emma, but to grab Lila's arm. Emma flinched, pulling Lila back, but she was too slow. Crash. The sound was apocalyptic. The diner's front doors didn't just open, they exploded inward, torn from their hinges as if by a bomb. They slammed against the interior walls, and the little bell above them was vaporized. The room was instantly full of men. 6, no, 7 of them. They were dressed in immaculate black suits, their movements silent, fluid, and terrifyingly precise. They fanned out, covering the windows, the back exit, and Big Jim, who had his hands half raised. The temperature in the diner plunged 20 degrees. And in the center, stepping through the ruined doorway, was Adrian Russo. The surveillance photos had been a joke. They hadn't captured the sheer, crushing presence of the man. He was tall, dressed in a suit that probably cost as much as the diner itself, and he moved with the lethal grace of a panther. He radiated a cold, focused power that sucked all the air from the room. His steel-gray eyes were perfectly, terrifyingly calm. Mitch had frozen, his hand still outstretched. His face, which had been flushed with rage, was now a waxy, sickly white. He knew exactly who this was. Adrian's gaze swept the room once, absorbing every detail in a microsecond: the cowering trucker, the nurse behind the booth, the shattered glass, Mitch Rollins, hand raised to grab his daughter. And finally, the waitress, her face a mask of terror and defiance, shielding Lila with her own body. "Mitch," Adrian Russo said. His voice was velvet wrapped around steel, a quiet rumble that carried absolute authority. It was the ultimate confrontation. The corrupt cop, all bluster and badge, versus the true apex predator. Mitch's training, his ego, his fear, it all collided. His hand, shaking, instinctively dropped to his holster. It was the last free move he was allowed to make. Before his fingers could even graze the grip of his gun, two of Adrian's men moved. It wasn't a fight, it was a disassembly. One man seized Mitch's wrist, twisting it in a lock that made a sickening pop. Mitch screamed. The other man slammed Mitch's face into the diner counter, right next to the pie display, shattering the glass dome. A third man calmly, almost bored, removed Mitch's sidearm, his backup piece from his ankle, and his taser. The entire, brutal neutralization took less than 3 seconds. Adrian Russo didn't even watch. He walked past the choking, gasping detective as if he were a piece of trash on the floor. He stopped a few feet from Emma and Lila and knelt, bringing himself down to his daughter's level. Lila, the moment she saw him, burst from behind Emma's legs and launched herself into her father's arms, her hands already moving frantically against the lapel of his suit. "Papa. Papa. I was so scared. I ran and I was lost. The man, he tried to take me. He's bad. He's bad. She saved me, Papa. The lady. Her name is Emma. She talked to me. She has my language. She saved me." Adrian held his daughter tightly with one arm, his hand gently stroking her hair, his eyes reading her frantic, silent story. His expression remained an unreadable mask of granite. Then, he looked up. His steel-gray eyes locked on Emma. He saw the terror. He saw the defiance. He saw the drying blood from the glass cuts on her hands. He saw her standing protectively, even now, over his neutralized, whimpering enemy. He stood, lifting Lila effortlessly in his arms. He nodded once, a short, sharp gesture to the men holding Mitch. "Let him go." His men complied, dropping Mitch to the filthy floor. He collapsed against the counter, gasping, his face bloody, his arm hanging uselessly. Adrian turned, his men parting for him like the sea. He paused in the ruined doorway, looking back one last time, not at Mitch, but at Emma. "You're coming with us." It wasn't a request. It wasn't an invitation. It was a statement of fact. Emma stood frozen, surrounded by shattered glass and the wreckage of her hidden life. She had been rescued from the predator she knew, only to be captured by the one she didn't. Her past and present had collided and destroyed her sanctuary, and her future was now being dragged, terrified, into the dark. The drive from the diner was a silent, terrifying blur. Emma was placed in a black SUV, alone in the back. Adrian and his daughter were in a separate, identical vehicle in front of them. It was a clear message: she was not with them, she was cargo. She was surrounded by buttery leather, the scent of which couldn't mask the faint, metallic tang of gun oil. She stared at her own reflection in the tinted window, a pale, terrified woman in a beige uniform spattered with dried coffee. Her life, the one she had so carefully, painfully constructed, was over. They didn't just drive to a house, they approached a compound. High, 20-foot stone walls topped with wrought iron spikes loomed out of the suburban darkness. A massive, reinforced gate slid open silently to admit them, then closed with a hydraulic thud that vibrated in her bones. This was a fortress. She saw cameras swiveling to track their progress, and men, real, armed guards with earpieces, patrolling the manicured lawns. Inside, the house was a cathedral of cold, dead space. The foyer was vast, all white marble and dark, ancestral portraits staring down with disapproving eyes. The air was still and smelled faintly of lemon oil and old money. A stern, gray-haired woman in a crisp black uniform, who Emma would come to know as Mrs. Castellano, appeared as if from the shadows. "This is Miss Chun," Adrian said, his voice flat. Lila was asleep, cradled in his arms. "She'll be staying in the East Wing." Mrs. Castellano's eyes flicked over Emma's diner uniform and shattered glass-cut hands with a disapproval so profound it was almost comical. She nodded once, a sharp, bird-like motion. "This way, miss." Emma was escorted up a winding staircase and through a labyrinth of silent, carpeted hallways. The opulence was suffocating. Every surface was polished, every painting priceless, but there was no life. No stray magazines, no shoes by the door, no sign that people actually lived here. Mrs. Castellano stopped at a heavy oak door and opened it. The room was larger than her entire apartment. A four-poster bed. A silk chaise lounge. A walk-in closet. And a wall of windows overlooking the dark, patrolled gardens. "Your things will be collected in the morning," Mrs. Castellano said, as if the very idea of Emma's things was distasteful. "Mr. Russo requests you remain here." The door clicked shut. Emma was alone. She exhaled, her breath fogging in the cold room. She went to the window first. It was beautiful. And it was sealed. The glass was thick, reinforced, and the latches were purely decorative. She went to the door. She turned the heavy, ornate brass handle. It didn't budge. It was locked. From the outside. She was a prisoner. A well-appointed one, but a prisoner nonetheless. She sank onto the priceless silk duvet and, for the first time since Mitch, she put her head in her hands and felt the walls of a cage, gilded this time, close in. She sat like that for hours, too terrified to sleep, too exhausted to move. She must have dozed, because the soft click of the lock jolted her awake. The sun was just beginning to filter through the thick glass. Emma scrambled to her feet, her heart leaping into her throat. Was it Adrian? One of his men? The door creaked open. Lila Russo stood in the doorway, dragging a large pillow and a blanket. She was in Superman pajamas, her dark hair a tousled mess. She looked at Emma, her expression impossibly serious for an 8-year-old. She walked into the room, dropped her pillow on the chaise lounge, and then climbed up onto it, pulling the blanket over her legs. Emma stared, her mouth open. Lila looked at her, then signed, her movements small and precise in the morning light. "Papa said you are a guest." "But the guard locked your door." "Guests don't have locked doors." Emma, her hands still shaking, signed back. "How did you get in?" A flicker of a smile, a flash of pure, childish mischief, crossed Lila's face. "I told him I was having a nightmare. That the bad man from the diner was in my room." She paused, then continued. "I told Papa I wouldn't go to sleep unless I was with you. He told the guard to let me in." She snuggled into the chaise, her dark eyes finding Emma's. "He'll have to leave it unlocked now." "If I'm here." Emma stared at the child. This small, silent girl had just calmly, deliberately countermanded a mafia boss's direct orders and liberated her from her cell. She wasn't just a companion. She was Emma's co-conspirator. She was her key. That morning, Emma's role in the Russo household was solidified. She was not a prisoner, nor was she staff. She was, by Lila's decree, Lila's. The staff, who had clearly been terrified of the silent, difficult Russo air, watched in stunned silence as the dynamic of the house shifted on its axis. Mrs. Castellano appeared at 10 a.m. with a tray. A bland, approved-looking bowl of oatmeal for Lila. The child looked at it, her face wrinkling in disgust. She looked at the housekeeper, and her hands became a frustrated, angry blur. No. No. I hate this. It's gross. No. Mrs. Castellano flinched back, her face pale, as if Lila had screamed at her. Signore Russo said. Emma stepped in, kneeling beside Lila. Hey, she signed, gently touching the girl's arm to get her attention. Your hands are very loud right now. You're shouting. Lila's hands froze. She's scared of me, Lila signed, her movements smaller now, sadder. They're all scared. They think I'm broken. They think I'm angry. You're not broken, Emma signed, her heart clenching. You just have a lot to say. But she doesn't understand your voice. Let's try, polite. Emma signed, please. Thank you. Excuse me. Lila copied her, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then, Emma smiled, a genuine, warm smile. Now, what do you really want to eat? Lila's eyes lit up. Pancakes. With chocolate chips. And a strawberry milkshake. Emma taught her the sign for strawberry milkshake. Lila, her face a mask of perfect, polite concentration, turned to Mrs. Castellano. She signed, slowly, please. May I have chocolate chip pancakes? And a strawberry milkshake? Thank you. The housekeeper looked at Emma, her jaw slack. Emma translated the request, her voice soft. She would like chocolate chip pancakes and a strawberry milkshake, please. Thank you. Mrs. Castellano looked from Emma to the girl, who was now smiling, and back to Emma. She nodded once, and practically fled the room. When she returned 20 minutes later with a stack of pancakes and a tall, pink milkshake, Lila giggled. It was a real, joyful, silent laugh. And in that moment, Emma felt a dangerous, unfamiliar warmth flood her chest. It wasn't just gratitude. It was belonging. From that day on, she was Lila's voice. She was her teacher. She taught her signs for things she'd never been able to express, frustrated, lonely, proud, silly. They invented secret signs for the guards. The stony-faced one by the front door was Mr. Statue, and the one who always paced was Twitchy. The cold, sterile mansion began to fill with the silent sound of their connection. Adrian watched. He was a ghost in his own home, a presence felt before he was seen. Emma would look up from a story she was signing to Lila in the garden and find him standing in the shadow of the library window. She would be teaching Lila to sign the alphabet, and she'd feel his gaze from the doorway. He said nothing, but his gratitude was a palpable force. A week after her arrival, he summoned her to his study. It was a dark, imposing room of leather and mahogany, smelling of old books and his cologne. Lila was there, perched on the edge of his massive desk, swinging her legs. She was their interpreter. You've done more for my daughter in 7 days, Adrian said, his voice a low rumble, than I've managed in the 3 years since her mother died. Emma signed, and Lila, with a new, proud confidence, spoke her words aloud. She just needed a voice. Someone who spoke her language. Adrian nodded, his gray eyes fixed on Emma. Mrs. Castellano tells me you had a visitor. At the diner. Lila's hands translated. Emma's blood chilled. He's a cop, Adrian stated. It wasn't a question. His name is Mitch Rollins, Emma signed, Lila dutifully speaking. We used to be together. I left 2 years ago. Adrian leaned forward. His focus was so intense, it was hard to breathe. Tell me. So she did. Lila's small hands and voice became the conduit for Emma's story. She told him about her sister, Sarah. About Mitch's charm. About the interpreting. About the control. About the night he'd grabbed her, the look in his eyes, the casual, terrifying statement, "You're mine." She finished, her hands shaking slightly. He's a cop, but he doesn't care about the law. He only cares about what he thinks he owns. Adrian sat back, his face carved from granite. He understood exactly what Mitch was. He had seen that obsessive, possessive sickness 1,000 times in his own world. It was a cancer. He looked at Emma, and the mask of the Mafia boss slipped, just for a second, revealing the man beneath. He raised his own hands. They were large, scarred, and surprisingly steady. He signed, slowly, deliberately, so she would not miss the meaning. "You are safe here." He paused, his eyes locked on hers. "He will not find you. He will not touch you. I promise." That night, Emma slept for 9 straight hours. She didn't dream of Mitch. She didn't dream of the diner. She woke up in the silk-sheeted bed, in a fortress owned by a killer, and felt a profound, staggering sense of relief. The paradox was almost dizzying. She was safer here, with him, than she had ever been with a man who wore a badge. It was a dangerous, complicated, and potent realization. But Mitch Rollins was a hunter, and he had been publicly humiliated. His 2 greatest obsessions, Emma and the Russo case, were now one. And he had been denied both. His retaliation was not swift, it was insidious. He began to squeeze. First, the legal attacks. Anonymous tips, perfectly timed, began hitting Russo businesses. Cops, not Mitch, but cops from precincts he had influence in, raided a Russo import-export warehouse, citing an illegal arms tip. They found nothing, but the operation was blown, costing Adrian millions and revealing a leak. Second, the personal attacks. Emma got a call in her room, on the private line Adrian had given her. It was her old landlord from her pre-Mitch apartment. "Emma? This cop, a Detective Rollins, he was here. Asking for you. He said he was worried. He was asking about your family, where they lived." He seemed intense. Mitch was hunting for her weaknesses, for leverage. Finally, the psychological attack. Adrian's head of security, a man named Marco, came to him with a grim face. "Boss, the word on the street is different. The Torinos are getting bold." He explained. "A rumor was circulating, Adrian Russo has a new weakness. A waitress living in his house. A babysitter for his kid." The implication was clear, take her, you take him. A target had been painted on Emma's back. Mitch can't stand that he lost control. His obsession is spiraling, and he'll tear down everyone, Adrian, Emma, even a child, to get what he wants. If you think this kind of toxic obsession is one of the worst human traits, hit a subscribe right now. People who support this kind of behavior are the only ones who won't. The pressure was mounting. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a bullseye. Adrian was stressed, his men on high alert. The final straw came in the form of an official, unavoidable letter, Lila's mandatory audiology evaluation for her cochlear implant candidacy. It had been on the books for months. It could not be rescheduled without raising flags. Adrian's security plan was military grade. A 3-car motorcade. An entire private wing of the St. Jude's audiology clinic rented out for 2 hours. Guards, led by Marco, at every elevator, every staircase, every door. It was airtight. Emma, Adrian, and Lila were ushered into the soundproof audiology booth. It was a small, padded room, sterile and quiet. Marco and 2 other guards stood directly outside the thick, double-paned glass door. "It will be 1 hour, Mr. Russo," the audiologist said, her voice tinny over the intercom. They were sealed in. Adrian sat in the corner, Lila sat at the testing table, and Emma sat beside her, ready to translate. 10 minutes in, they heard a muffled commotion through the thick glass. Emma looked up. Through the glass, she saw the main clinic doors at the end of the hall burst open. It wasn't gunmen. It was worse. 2 women in sharp blue suits, flanked by 4 uniformed police officers, strode in. One held up a badge and a sheaf of papers. Child Protective Services. We have an immediate removal warrant for Lila Russo, citing endangerment and the police incident at Mickey's diner. Marco and his men immediately moved to block them, hands on their weapons. But they couldn't shoot. This was an illegal attack. A brilliant, devastating checkmate. All attention, all security, was now focused on the standoff at the end of the hall. Adrian was on his feet, his face a mask of cold fury, his hand on the handle of the inside of the booth door. And then, Emma heard it. A soft, magnetic click. She looked at the booth door. A small red light near the handle had turned on. It was locked. Remotely. Adarian's hand froze on the useless handle. He yanked it. Nothing. They were sealed in. Papa. Lila signed, her eyes wide with fear. Then, a second door on the opposite wall of the booth, a door Emma hadn't even registered, one that blended into the padded wall, leading to an adjoining observation office, swung open. Mitch Rollins stood in the doorway. He wasn't in uniform. He was wearing a smug, triumphant smile, his eyes glittering with a poison that was almost ecstatic. He looked past Adrian, past the terrified child, and his gaze landed, with the force of a physical blow, on Emma. "Hello, Em," he said, his voice perfectly clear over the intercom. "Did you really think you could hide from me?" He's cornered them. Mitch is abusing his power, his badge, and everything he's supposed to stand for. This is the ultimate manipulation. Like this video if you're sick of villains like Mitch always thinking they've won. Let's see if we can get 1,000 likes for Emma and Lila. The heavy, padded door of the audiology booth clicked shut, and the world vanished. Silence. Not the quiet, empty silence of Emma's old apartment. This was a thick, engineered, suffocating void. On the other side of the glass door, in the hallway, the scene was a silent movie of pure chaos. Emma could see Adrian, his face a mask of primal, contorted fury, slam his shoulder against the locked door. His mouth was open, shouting words she couldn't hear. Marco and his other guard were in a standoff with the CPS agents and the cops, their hands on their weapons, but unable to act. A brilliant, perfect trap. Mitch Rollins stood in the observation room doorway, bathed in the fluorescent light. He hadn't stepped fully into the booth. He was savoring this. He leaned against the door jamb, his arms crossed, his smile a sickening mix of triumph and pity. "See, Em?" His voice, piped in over the small intercom, was the only sound in the world. It was calm, reasonable. It was the voice he used right before he got what he wanted. "See what happens when you play with animals? They put you in a cage." Lila was a small, trembling weight behind Emma's legs, her hands clinging to the back of Emma's jeans. She was too scared to even sign. "It's okay," Mitch continued, his voice dripping with a sick, paternalistic sweetness. "I'm here now. I'm getting you out." He looked past Emma, his gaze landing on the furious, trapped figure of Adrian Russo. "Look at him. The big, bad wolf, huh? Not so tough when he's on the other side of the glass. This is what I've been protecting you from, Em. This is the filth I was trying to keep you away from." He stepped into the booth. The room, already small, seemed to shrink to the size of a coffin. He hit a switch on the wall, and the intercom clicked off. Now, his voice was just his, intimate and terrifying, filling the padded space. It took me a while, I'll admit, he said, beginning to circle them like a shark in a tank. Emma instinctively turned, keeping herself between him and Lila. But I never gave up on you. I knew he had you. Drugged, probably. Brainwashed. God knows what else this animal has been doing to you. But that's okay. It's over. His eyes dropped to Lila, who was peeking around Emma's thigh. His expression soured, as if looking at an inconvenient piece of evidence. And we'll take her, too, I guess, Mitch said, gesturing with a dismissive flick of his hand. We'll get her safe. Child Services has her file. They'll find her a nice, clean place. With professionals. Away from all this. He was going to put her in the system. A deaf, nonverbal child, separated from her father, from the only person who could speak her language, and throw her into the bureaucratic, institutional meat grinder. It wasn't a rescue. It was a life sentence. See, Em? He gave her that smile again, the one that made her stomach turn. I'm the good guy. I'm rescuing you. And in that instant, something inside Emma snapped. It wasn't a loud, fiery explosion. It was a cold, sharp, tectonic shift. The fear that had been her constant companion for 2 years, that sick, cold dread that lived in her stomach, was still there. But she wasn't the same woman who had poured coffee in a diner. That woman was a ghost, a victim, a rabbit hiding in the shadows. This woman had been living in a lion's den. She had been protected by the very man Mitch called an animal. She had been given a purpose. She had found a family. She looked at Mitch. Really, truly looked at him. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a demon. He wasn't even a particularly good cop. He was just pathetic. He was a man who had to tear down the world just to feel tall. He needed her to be his victim. He needed her to be weak so he could be her protector. His entire identity was built on her fear. He hadn't hunted her down out of love, he'd done it out of a furious, narcissistic pride. He wasn't saving her, he was reclaiming property. Her gaze flicked, just for a second, to the man on the other side of the glass. Adrian. A killer. A mob boss. A bad man by every definition. But he had never, not once, tried to control her. He had learned her sister's language, however poorly, to speak to his daughter. He had built a fortress to protect his family, not a cage to trap one person. He had seen her strength in the diner and valued it. Mitch had seen that same strength and tried to break it. The fear in her stomach, that cold, paralyzing ocean, didn't evaporate. It froze. It condensed. It hardened into a solid, heavy core of pure, crystalline rage. Mitch was still talking. We'll file a restraining order. You'll testify. We'll put him away for good, and then we can finally be together, Em. The way it was always supposed to be. Emma's eyes, still wide with what Mitch mistook for terror, began to move. She was no longer a rabbit. She was a wolf, caught in a trap, and she was done being afraid. She was ready to chew off her own leg to get free. Her mind stopped screaming, run. It started whispering, attack. Her gaze wasn't looking for an escape route. There wasn't one. She was looking for a weapon. Her eyes flicked around the sterile, padded room. The audiologist's rolling chair. A heavy, metal otoscope on the counter. A tangle of testing wires. An old-fashioned, beige landline phone on the wall. And next to it, a small, red, square box. A fire alarm. Mitch was in full, glorious monologue. He paced the small, padded room, his chest puffed with the sick righteousness of a man who believes his own lies. And we'll file the restraining order first thing. You'll testify, of course. Everything he did to you, how he threatened you, forced you. It's a clean-cut case, Em. We'll put him away for good, and then we can be us again. He smiled, a grotesque twisting of features that was meant to be reassuring. A nice little house, upstate. Away from all this filth. I'll get you in with the state police, liaison work. See? I'm the good guy, Em. I'm rescuing you. Emma watched him, and the cold, hard rage in her stomach began to think. She was no longer a victim, she was a strategist. Her mind, sharp and clear, flashed back. It was a month ago. A rare, quiet evening in Adrian's study. Lila was asleep on the sofa, and Adrian was staring into the unlit fireplace, a glass of something dark in his hand. My grandfather, he'd said, his voice quiet, was from Cefalu. He had a different way of speaking. He didn't trust phones. He didn't trust English. He'd turned to her, his gray eyes serious. This world, it's built on secrets. And Lila, she's the most important one. But she has a language that everyone can see. I need you both to have one that no one can. He'd spent an hour teaching them. They weren't just signs. They were archaic, almost crude gestures, remnants of an old, Sicilian sign system. A sharp, downward jab of the fist, danger. A hand drawn slowly across the throat, police. A flat palm held over the heart, wait. And one more. A fist, closed, with the thumb flicked out and up, a sharp, cutting motion. This, Adrian had said, his eyes hard, is for when there is no other choice. It means fire. It means burn it down. It means attack. Now, in the soundproof booth, Mitch turned his back, gesturing expansively at the wall, painting a picture of their future. Lila was still plastered to Emma's back, her small hands gripping Emma's jeans. Emma's hands were at her own waist, hidden by her body, hidden by the child. They were completely invisible to Mitch. Her fingers moved, pressing into Lila's side. She didn't sign danger. She didn't sign wait. She made a fist, flicked her thumb, and made the sharp, cutting motion. Fire. Now. Lila, her father's daughter, did not question. She didn't hesitate. She was a silent blur. 1 second, she was behind Emma, the next, she was across the room, a small, Superman pajama-clad missile. She launched herself at the wall and slammed her entire body weight onto the small, red fire alarm box. Nothing happened. The room remained utterly, perfectly silent. Mitch, hearing the thud of Lila hitting the wall, turned. He laughed, a short, ugly bark. What's that, Em? Trying to call the... A light on the ceiling, a bright, white dome, suddenly exploded in a pulsing, blinding strobe. Red. 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 The room was bathed in silent, frantic flashes of crimson. A low, thrumming vibration began to hum in the floor, an alarm so deep it was felt rather than heard. Through the glass door, Emma saw the effect. The CPS agents and the cops, who had been in a tense standoff with Adrian's men, startled. They looked up, confused, at the flashing strobes that had just ignited in the hallway. The perfect, legal wall they had formed was momentarily broken. The diversion was working. Mitch was stunned, his face, flashing red and white, was a mask of confusion. What did you do? He roared, his voice cracking. You stupid little. He lunged for Emma. This was what she was waiting for. She didn't pull away. She used his momentum, shoving past him in a blur of motion. She wasn't running for the main door, Adrian was on the other side, but he was useless. She grabbed Lila, who was frozen by the strobe, and shoved her bodily into the small, dark, adjoining observation office that Mitch had come from. She signed one fierce command, her hands a blur in the flashing red light. Stay. Do not move. She slammed the closet-like door and turned to face Mitch. She was a cornered animal. And she was done running. She didn't move toward the locked exit. She scrambled over the audiologist's chair, lunging for the other side of the room. "You think you're so smart, Mitch," she screamed, her voice raw, loud, a target. "You think you've won." He took the bait. "I have won, Emma," he bellowed, his face puce. He was no longer the calm, good guy a cop. He was the enraged, thwarted man she'd fled. He lunged for her again. But she was faster. Her fingers, closing not on a weapon but on a tool, wrapped around the heavy, beige landline phone on the wall cradle. She tore it from its base. Her other hand, a blur, flew across the 12-button keypad, dialing a number she had memorized, a number that was not 911. Mitch grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back with a scream of pain. "Who are you calling?" "The police." "I am the police." The line clicked. A single, cold voice on the other end. "Emma." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. He knew. Through the glass, flashing red, she could see him. Adrian, his face a mask of such profound, murderous fury it was barely human, had his own phone pressed to his ear. He'd been trying to call her. Emma, her hair in Mitch's grip, her neck straining, screamed into the receiver. "St. Jude's," she gasped, "his leverage." "Pier 12. Unit 4B. Pier 12. Mitch froze. The words hit him like a bullet. "Pier 12, Unit 4B. His grip on her hair went slack. His face, which had been a mask of rage, collapsed into one of ashen, gut-shot horror. It wasn't just a place. It was his place. It was his illegal evidence lockup. His extortion stash. The leverage he held over judges, the planted evidence, the payoffs. His entire secret life, the web of corruption that made him untouchable, was in that one, single room. He, the good cop, had a secret far dirtier than Adrian's. And Emma, his victim, his possession, had just served it to Adrian Russo on a silver platter. He didn't just understand what she'd done. He understood that she had just ended him. This wasn't an escape. It was an execution. His rage, his triumph, his obsession, it all curdled into one, final, pathetic act of violence. He didn't just hit her. He backhanded her across the face with the full, desperate force of his arm. The world exploded in white light, momentarily brighter than the strobe. The phone clattered from her numb hand, swinging on its cord. Emma slumped against the padded wall, her ear ringing, the sharp, metallic taste of her own blood flooding her mouth. The line was dead. Mitch was panting, his chest heaving, his face a mask of primal terror. All his bravado, all his good guy rhetoric, was gone. He was trapped. He looked at Emma, bleeding against the wall. He looked at the locked closet door where he'd lost his leverage. He looked at the impossible, furious man on the other side of the glass. The strobe flashed, bathing them all in silent, pulsing blood. Red. 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 The sound of the phone disconnecting was a dull, plastic clack in the flashing, silent red of the audiology booth. Emma's head exploded in a universe of white, pinpoint stars. She tasted the sharp, coppery tang of her own blood. She was on the floor, her cheekbone pressed against the cold, industrial-grade carpet, the world a disorienting, pulsing blur of crimson light. Mitch was panting. Not with rage, but with a new, ragged, animalistic terror. He looked at his hand, slick with her blood. He looked at the phone, swinging on its cord like a hanged man. He looked at the locked closet door where he'd lost his primary leverage. And he looked at the flashing, silent red light that signaled a total system failure. He, the man with the badge, the man with all that illegal power, had just been checkmated by a waitress and a mafia boss. His entire life, his career, his web of extortion and power, Pier 12, Unit 4B, was now a ticking time bomb. He was done. He was vaporized. But even a dying animal has teeth. His ambition was dead. His career was dead. But his obsession, his sick, twisted, possessive need for her, was still raging. If he was going down, he was not going down alone. "You, bitch," he choked out, his voice a hoarse, broken thing. "You think you won? You just signed your own death warrant. You think he's going to keep you?" He grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanking her up from the floor. "You're mine. You've always been mine." He was no longer a cop. He was a kidnapper. He dragged her toward the main booth door, the one he knew, had to have a fire release. He slammed his hand on the silver panic bar. Click. The heavy, soundproof door swung open, and the world screamed. Hoop. 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 The noise of the building's fire alarm was a physical, deafening assault. The hallway was a scene of pure pandemonium. The strobe lights, now matched with the auditory screech, made everything frantic and unreal. People were running, nurses, patients in gowns. Down the hall, Emma saw the tableau that had been frozen behind the glass. The CPS agents were shouting at the cops. The cops were in a standoff with Adrian's men. She saw Marco, his face a mask of fury, shove one of the uniformed officers. The officer retaliated, drawing a taser. On the other side of the hall, behind the other set of locked glass doors, was Adrian. He was a lion in a cage, his fist pounding on the reinforced glass, his face a silent, murderous roar. He was watching. He was helpless. Mitch saw none of this. He was beyond strategy. He was pure, desperate instinct. He had his prize. He wrapped his arm around Emma's throat, half carrying, half dragging her, and bolted for the red, glowing emergency exit sign at the far end of the hall. "You're coming with me, Em," he screamed over the alarm, his spittle hitting her face. "We're disappearing. You and me. You'll never see him or that brat again. You're mine." Emma fought, her heels scraping for purchase, her fingers clawing at the arm cutting off her air, but she was dizzy, disoriented from the blow. Her vision was graying at the edges. She saw Adrian, a distant, furious phantom, slam his entire body against the glass. He couldn't get to her. Mitch was 5 feet from the exit. He was going to make it. He was going to drag her into the stairwell, into the night, and she would be gone. He hit the crash bar with his shoulder. The heavy steel door didn't just open. It exploded inward, slamming back against Mitch's shoulder with the force of a battering ram, making him roar in pain and surprise. Standing in the doorway, framed against the flashing red and blue lights of their own squad cars, were 2 uniformed police officers. They weren't from Mitch's precinct. They looked grim, uncomfortable, and utterly resolute. And behind them, a man in an immaculate, unrumpled charcoal suit stepped into the hallway. He was thin, with pale eyes and the bored, unassailable authority of a man who audits gods. He held up a small, leather-bound wallet, flipping it open to show a gold badge. "Internal Affairs," he said. His voice was flat, calm, and cut through the hoop of the alarm like a scalpel. The chaos in the hallway stopped. The cops froze. The CPS agents froze. Marco, his hand halfway to his own weapon, froze. Even Mitch, his arm still locked around Emma's throat, went perfectly, deathly still. Mitch's face, which had been a mask of desperate rage, collapsed. This was a threat he had no defense against. This wasn't a mobster he could shoot. This wasn't a witness he could intimidate. This was the system. This was the church itself, turning to excommunicate one of its own priests. The IA agent, Kenzie, stepped forward, his shoes clicking on the linoleum. He didn't look at Emma. He didn't look at the chaos. His pale eyes were fixed, like pins, on Mitch. "Detective Mitchell Rollins," Kenzie said. It wasn't a question. Mitch's colleagues, the ones who had been backing his play against Adrian's men, now suddenly found the floor tile fascinating. They wouldn't look at him. This is a misunderstanding," Mitch choked out, his grip on Emma faltering. "I'm in the middle of a tactical situation. I've secured the asset." "Is that what you call her?" Kenzie asked, his voice devoid of any emotion. He took a single step closer. "We just received a priority call. From the commissioner's office." He let the words hang in the air. "The ultimate source of power. The top of the food chain. Your name was mentioned," Kenzie continued, his voice dropping, "in relation to an unregistered private storage unit. Pier 12. Unit 4B. If the first aid kit on the wall had suddenly turned into a snake, Mitch could not have been more horrified. It wasn't just a loss. It was an evisceration. The blood drained from his face, leaving a sallow, sagging mask of pure, abject terror. He finally understood. Adrian hadn't sent his thugs. He hadn't started a war in the street. He had picked up a phone. He had taken Emma's sword and, with one single, surgical call, had plunged it legally into Mitch's corrupt heart. He hadn't been beaten by a killer. He'd been beaten at his own game by a smarter, better connected, and infinitely more ruthless player. "We have a warrant for your arrest, Detective," Kenzie said, his voice laced with boredom. "Multiple counts of evidence tampering, conspiracy to distribute, and extortion." He looked at the two uniformed officers behind him. "Cuff him." The two uniforms moved in, their faces hard with the grim anger of cops who hate a dirty cop. They ripped Emma from Mitch's grasp, shoving her toward the wall, and slammed Mitch face first against the concrete. "You can't do this," Mitch shrieked, his voice a high, pathetic whine. "I'm the police." "You were," one of the cops grunted, wrenching Mitch's arm behind his back. The sharp, metallic click-click-click of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the loudest sound in the universe. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock, forever. "He's done." Mitch thought his badge made him untouchable, but he was just a corrupt bully. "He's finally facing the consequences." If you believe no one is above the law, comment checkmate down below. Let's fill the comments with victory for Emma. As if summoned by the sound, the hoop of the fire alarm abruptly died, plunging the hallway into a ringing, profound silence. At the far end of the hall, the main clinic doors clicked and swung open. A shell-shocked nurse had finally activated the release. Adrian Russo stepped out. He stood there for a single second, a king surveying his conquered territory. His suit was immaculate. His hair was perfect. His gray eyes were chips of polar ice. He looked at the IA agent, who gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Transaction complete. He looked at the shell-shocked CPS agents, who suddenly looked like they wanted to be anywhere else on Earth. He looked at his men, who were already securing the perimeter. And then, he walked. He walked past the two uniformed officers. He walked past the IA agent. He walked past Mitch Rollins, who was being hauled to his feet, a cuffed, defeated, sobbing wreck of a man. Adrian didn't look at him. He didn't spare him a single glance. Mitch, his mortal enemy, the man who had plagued him for a year, was now less than nothing. He was irrelevant. Adrian's eyes were only on Emma. She was leaning against the wall, her lips split and bleeding, her whole body shaking from the adrenaline crash, her hand pressed to her throbbing head. But she was standing. He didn't run. He moved with that same, deliberate, terrifying control. He reached her, and his large, scarred hands came up to cup her face. His grip was impossibly gentle. His thumb moved, tracing the line of her jaw, brushing the blood from the corner of her mouth. He searched her eyes, and in their depths was a storm of fury, relief, and something else, something she couldn't name. He said nothing. He didn't have to. His arm, a band of steel, went around her waist, pulling her protectively to his side. He held her there, a silent statement to the entire world. She is mine. Then, he turned, supporting her, and strode to the small observation room. He didn't knock. He put his hand on the door and tore it open. Lila was huddled in the far corner, behind a metal file cabinet, her eyes squeezed shut, her hands clamped over her ears. A useless, heartbreaking gesture for a girl who couldn't hear the chaos she was hiding from. Emma pulled away from Adrian's side, stumbling on her own. She dropped to her knees in front of the cabinet. Lila's terror was so profound, she didn't even notice. Emma put her hand on the girl's small, shaking shoulder. Lila's eyes flew open. They were black with terror. Emma's hands, shaking, came up. It's over, she signed, her own blood smearing on her palm. We're safe. Papa's here. Lila's gaze snapped from Emma to the doorway. Adrian was standing there, his massive frame filling the small space, his face a wreck of relief and a rage so deep it was holy. Papa. The name was a silent scream from her flying hands. She launched herself from the corner, a small, Superman pajamaed cannonball, and flew into her father's arms. Adrian caught her, his arms crushing her to his chest. He buried his face in her hair, his eyes squeezing shut, his composure finally, completely cracking. He held his daughter with one arm, his body shuddering with one, single, silent sob of pure relief. With his other arm, he reached down, his hand finding Emma's. He didn't just help her up. He pulled her into the embrace. He stood in the middle of the hallway, a king in his conquered hall, surrounded by the wreckage of his enemy. He held his daughter in one arm, and the woman who had saved them in the other. He held them, bruised and terrified and whole, and did not let them go. The library was silent, a sanctuary of dark wood and the scent of old paper. Outside the massive, floor-to-ceiling window, the sky was changing, the bruised, inky purple of the night yielding to a thin, determined line of pale gold. The sun was rising. Emma stood watching it, a cashmere blanket, draped over her shoulders by a silent Mrs. Castellano hours ago, had slipped to the floor. A fresh butterfly bandage pulled taut on her cheek. Her body ached, a deep, thrumming exhaustion. But her mind was quiet. The constant, high-pitched ringing of fear that had been her companion for 2 years was finally, completely, gone. Mitch was gone. She was, for the first time in memory, truly free. On the massive leather sofa nearby, Lila was buried in a nest of pillows, fast asleep. Her face was peaceful, all the terror and tension of the clinic having melted away in the safety of her own bed, before she crept downstairs, needing to be near them. Adrian's reflection appeared in the glass next to hers. He wasn't looking at the sunrise, he was looking at her. His gray eyes, no longer chips of polar ice but something warmer, something changed, were filled with a raw, unguarded emotion she had never seen there. Aw. It's over, he said, his voice a low rumble, not the voice of a boss, but of a man. Kenzie, the IA agent, just called. Mitch is in federal custody. The anonymous tip about Pier 12 has given the commissioner's office enough cause to clean house. He will never see the outside of a cell again. He turned from the window to face her, his suit rumpled, his hair for the first time slightly out of place. I had a dozen men in that building. I had guns, armor, and a plan to burn the entire block to the ground. And I was useless. Trapped behind glass, watching him put his hands on you. His hands clenched at his sides. You, he said, his voice thick with the realization, were in a soundproof box with a child. And you didn't wait to be saved. You didn't just fight. You saw the entire board, and you found the one move that would topple his king. He stepped closer, his gaze intense. You gave me the sword. He saw you as a weakness, a victim he could exploit. He was wrong. You're this family's greatest strength. He offered his hand, not to take hers, but palm up, an offering. I am not a good man, Emma. I am everything he accused me of being. This life is not safe. He took a breath, the words costing him, but I am asking you to stay. Not as Lila's teacher. Not as my guest, to be protected. I'm asking you to stay as my partner. He held her gaze, his heart in his eyes. As my wife. Emma, the woman who had run from a man with a badge, now looked at a man who ruled an empire. She saw the truth. One had tried to own her, to make her small. This one was offering her a throne, to make her powerful. She was no longer a woman running from her past. She was a woman who had claimed her future. She didn't just say yes. She stepped into his space, reached up, and kissed him. It was not a kiss of surrender. It was a kiss of arrival. A small, sleepy sound made them break apart. On the sofa, Lila was sitting up, her dark hair a wild halo, her eyes blinking in the new morning light. She saw them. She saw her father, his arm now wrapped protectively around Emma's waist. She saw Emma, her hand resting on his chest, her head tilted toward him. She saw two people, separate and broken, who were now standing as one. A slow, radiant, all-encompassing smile spread across her face. Her hands, steady and sure, came up in the golden light. Mom, she signed, looking at Emma. Dad, she signed, looking at Adrian. Then, she signed the one word that fixed all of them, her small hands encompassing the room, the morning, and the two of them. Home. From a hunted waitress to the heart of a new family. Emma didn't just find safety, she created it. If you loved this story of strength and justice, hit that subscribe button and join us. Only people who root for the villain would refuse.